Good afternoon, dear viewers. Welcome to XIDIG TV, the first bilingual TV station of its kind in central Minnesota. My name is Abdi Ibrahim, and we are glad to have the opportunity to interview today Minnesota's 50th Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, at our studio in St. Cloud. Lieutenant Governor, welcome to our studio. You're the first guest. So my first question is, I know you're passionate about a few things, children, families, and people who are underserved. So tell us more about yourself and your main priority areas of focus.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. The studio is amazing, and I'm so happy to be here and really humbled to be the first interview here in this space. We've been here in St. Cloud today doing multiple events with community focused on childcare, bonding and infrastructure. I did a visit to a local business as well today, really celebrating central Minnesota and St. Cloud. And my background, what brought me here, I didn't grow up thinking I'd be the Lieutenant Governor, but there are many things that happened in my life that led me to this role in this position. The most important thing I think about is how I was raised. I was raised in the community of St. Louis Park, and my mom used a Section 8 housing voucher to find an apartment for us to live in. We relied on SNAP, which back in the day we called food stamps, and the Child Care Assistance Program was really important to our family, so my mom could go to school and get a better paying job to take care of us. So now I get to pay that back and pay that forward through my role, and really the centering children and families really just comes from my experience as a young person, but also as a child advocate, leading Children's Defense Fund, Minnesota, working in the legislature, and also having my partner in justice, Governor Walz, who is also a teacher, so understands a thing or two about children. But that's what brings me here, and I'm just happy to be here with you today.
Thank you. I think you have a humble beginning, and now that you're a Lieutenant Governor trying to serve people who are always underserved is an inspiration to all the people who are struggling today with different issues. You are here today in St. Cloud, and you are touting a child care plan. Tell us more about that plan and if it's going to serve all Minnesota children and families.
Yes, so the goal of our administration, Governor Walz and I want to make Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a child. And so we also know that children and families don't come in pieces. So we want to make sure that we are sort of meeting families where they're at. And that includes childcare and education, investments in housing. And so when it comes to childcare, we want to make sure that childcare is affordable and accessible to everyone in the state. We have something called our dependent care credit, which will provide tax credit to families of multiple children, which could be up to the amount of $8,000 to give folks relief for some childcare costs. We also want to increase the childcare assistance program reimbursement to the 75th percentile. We know that there's a lot of childcare providers who take children who utilize the child care assistance program. We don't want them to take that on a loss. We want to make sure that they can have sustainable businesses. And then the other piece that I'm really excited about is we have funding for child care workers themselves. We know that child care is the backbone of our economy. It is the workforce behind the workforce. And we need folks who work in child care to stay in the business, to continue to serve communities. And we know that in greater Minnesota, that it can be difficult to find childcare, and we want to remove some of those barriers for folks opening up childcare businesses, as well as make it sustainable for folks in the long term. So it's a big focus of our budget is childcare, and we heard from families and providers and from some children today too about the importance of childcare, and I'm excited. I think we'll be able to make a big difference this session.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. I think you are a pioneer for expansion of childcare, and this is really needed, particularly among the Somali community, with large families.
Yes.
And both parents planning to work. It's just so hard to make those ends meet. Absolutely. So what is the plan like for people who have large families? Does that plan covers every child in that family, or it covers specific number of children in the family?
It's up to 4 children. And so we know that it can make a tremendous difference. But when we talk about our budget overall, the dependent care credit is part of it, but we also have something called the child tax credit. This alone will lower child poverty in Minnesota by 25%. We think that will make a big difference for folks. But we also know that as you're talking about children with, or families with lots of children or large families, we also know that housing is a really important issue too. And so we're making big investments there. We can talk more about that a little later, but I think that all these pieces are connected to each other. So we think that families will see, frankly, more money in their pockets at the end of the day with the dependent care credit and the child tax credit. But we also hope we're going to continue to push for these rebate checks, these direct checks to families as well, so that we can invest in communities in the long term and families in the long term, but in the short term, give some folks a little relief to pay for those everyday expenses that pop up.
The Democratic leaders and the administration have agreed on a broader budget target. We know that includes $3 billion for tax credit and rebate checks, but we know the details of where the money would go is subject to negotiation. Mm-hmm. So as the House and the Senate embark on setting a balanced state budget for the next 2 years, what's your ideal outcome on the ongoing negotiation?
So the ideal outcome is that, families can afford their lives. And so we think the dependent care credit, the child tax credit, but also these checks we think can make a really big difference. There's been some people who have said people don't need that money, or $500 there, $1,000 there, it doesn't make a difference. But that tells me that you've never had to figure out how to make $20 last for the rest of the week. Or, as a mom of a 10-year-old, she goes through shoes and clothes like nobody's business. She's always, growing. And so these are real expenses. Or if you have a car repair, all these things we know that families are dealing with every single day. So if we can provide a little bit of cushion, a little bit of relief, we think that'll make a difference. So I think, these tax credits that go directly to families, but also these checks, the governor, and I think that'll make a big difference for families. And we're hearing it from folks all across the state.
You've spoken of nice checks. So what are we talking about? How big or small are those checks?
So that's certainly up to negotiation, right, with the House and Senate. Originally, we had proposed in the amount of $2,600. We think, we will certainly land at a place that will make a difference for families. So stay tuned on that piece. But again, we think this is a portion of giving families immediate relief, having some of those long-term investments in housing and childcare, in education and transportation, all these pieces working together, we think will really benefit families across the state.
Okay. So speaking of allocation of funds, Minnesota is divided into twin cities and the greater Minnesota. And historically, most of the funding has been going to the metro area. And greater Minnesota has been always, on the sideline or neglected. So what is your plan to ensure equitable distribution of those funds? Specifically, now that we have surplus budget, how are we going to make sure people in central Minnesota, southwest Minnesota, all these outlying regions get a fair share of that surplus funding?
So ensuring that we have funding that is equitable across the state and greater Minnesota receives their fair share has been a priority for the governor and I since we came into office. We've tried to deliver that way where it comes to investments. One of the things I think that folks can depend on is knowing that oftentimes for the grant funding and the funding that we give out, there's money that goes to the Twin Cities, but there's a requirement that about 50% of that goes out to greater Minnesota as well. We think there's opportunities with education, with increasing the per pupil funding formula, but also having targeted dollars that go to the schools and communities that need them most. I think housing is something that we hear about every place we go in the state, and making those investments all the way from our relatives who are experiencing homelessness all the way to first-time home buyers. And that's something that we know affects people across the state. Making sure that everyone has access to broadband is another piece that we know affects people in greater Minnesota. We've made those investments as well. But I think today the governor is in Moorhead. Yesterday he was in Ely. Today I'm in St. Cloud. It's important for us to also show up and to be in community and hear directly from Minnesotans about the issues that they're experiencing, so that we make sure that the proposals that we are bringing forward and the budget and policies reflect Greater Minnesota, and people can see themselves in the things that we're introducing. We think we've done a good job of that so far, but in a second term, it provides an additional opportunity for us to do so.
Awesome. I think it's fair to say if you guys are allocating 50% of the funding to go to Greater Minnesota, that makes sense. So thank you so much for that response. So Central Minnesota and St. Cloud in particular is home to the largest concentration of Somalis in North America, per capita. So what a deliberate effort is the administration, the governor and the lieutenant governor are doing to ensure that they're economically and socially integrated into the community, knowing that they have a higher level of poverty rate compared to the statewide. It's about 70% of the Somalis in Minnesota live below the poverty line. So what's the administration doing to just uplift those people to be part of the mainstream society?
Absolutely. Well, it comes back to some of the things that we've already talked about. The child tax credit, we think, will make a big difference, lowering child poverty by 25% in the state. That certainly Somali families across the state will be impacted by that funding. The rebate checks as well. But we've also heard a lot about education, about English language learners, about making sure that we have culturally responsive programming in all of our schools. But there's two things that have really, I've heard from the community directly, is the need for having zero interest loans so that we can have first-time home buyers. We've included that in our housing package. We think that that's important, as well as building multifamily housing or housing that meets the need of the community, so that sometimes we have intergenerational households. Many times families are larger, there's lots of children, and so making sure that we have a housing stock that meets the needs of the Somali community has been incredibly important to us. And the other piece that we've heard about is the opioid crisis and the impact that has been made on the Somali community. So we have introduced funding that will go directly to organizations that serve the community, trying to remove some of the stigma around this issue, and especially for our young people, making sure that they have the support for prevention in the first place, but also dollars for treatment and recovery. Those are some of the things that we've heard as we've been out in the community, in the Somali community, and what folks have been asking us for.
Thank you so much. So my next question is on the political front. The Twin Cities, the Somalis in Twin Cities have been successful. They have been elected into office. They had cabinet appointments. But here also in Central Minnesota, there's a significant number of Somalis. What is your plan of future cabinet appointment from someone in St. Cloud or anything in the making?
So we have over 400 commissions and advisory committees that are available for folks to serve on just in the state of Minnesota alone through all of our state agencies. And I would encourage people to apply. We are intentional about doing outreach, but we always can do more. I think we have seen the results have changed with the kind of things, even in this legislative session, based on having more representation. It makes an incredible difference in the legislature. We've already seen this with the statewide holiday of Juneteenth. We have seen it with the Crown Act that was passed banning hair discrimination in Minnesota. We've seen it in the investments that we are making in education and community and universal meals, making sure that every child is fed both breakfast and lunch when they go to school. That has happened because we have the most diverse legislature in the history of the state. And I think every election cycle, we see that happening more and more. My hope is that we continue to become more diverse. There are opportunities, I think, here in St. Cloud and in the region for more folks in the community to step up, to run for office, to see them so they can see themselves reflected in leadership. when I first started off in this work, there were no elected officials from my community, from the Native community. That has changed. And so I oftentimes think about the similarities between the Native community and the Somali community, and now we're building political power, and it matters. It matters that we're at the table. And so, we want the community to lead the way, and we want to be able to be there to support, and just continuing to let folks know about the opportunities to serve in our administration on all these committees and councils that are available for folks. We need the voice of the Somali community in everything that we're doing, and that's just one powerful way that people could get more involved.
Thank you so much. So affordable housing is a big issue, and there's a huge need here in central Minnesota. So specifically for the Black and brown folks. So there's need for additional affordable housing, that's one, and there's also need for additional home ownership. You mentioned of zero interest rate. So can you talk more about how we can have more affordable housing and then more home ownership that meets the interest and the cultural specific of the people?
Absolutely. So this has been something that the governor and I have heard for a very long time. And so when we put together this budget, we wanted to make sure that the voices of the Somali community were included in what we're rolling out through Minnesota Housing. Our budget proposal has $1.6 billion in it for housing. And that, again, is from all the entire spectrum of housing, which we think it's important to cover the whole spectrum. There are people who are sleeping outside tonight because they are unhoused. So making sure that we are making those investments there for emergency shelter, for transitional housing, then making sure that there's more rentals that are available for folks, but ultimately wanting to really see more home ownership. We know that we have some of the largest disparities between the white community and communities of color when it comes to home ownership. So that's why for first-time home buyers assistance and the programs that we have there, we're being really intentional by targeting communities of color and making sure that we have these zero interest loans, in partnering with organizations who can take on those loans, and the community can go through those nonprofits or through those organizations to access those dollars. We know just how important that is, and being culturally responsive and making sure that home ownership, that there aren't barriers for folks, that we can help to remove some of those through Minnesota Housing. We think it's a powerful thing, and it's one of the things where I hope that the community, specifically the Somali community in St. Cloud, can see the feedback, the input that they gave to the governor and to me, that it is directly contained in the budget proposal that we have put together.
So how does the zero interest work?
So the zero interest works that there are dollars that will be allocated to an organization who can then give out these zero interest loans. There's a lot more, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that is the sort of, that's what I understand here on the, just on the surface. But we can get you more details about what that looks like, but we've had that's proposed in our budget.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I mean, the community, one of the main barriers to home ownership has been the financing, with the interest. Many are concerned about compromising their faith over their home. They're like, I could be a renter forever if that means, compromising on my faith. And I want to thank the governor and the lieutenant governor for spearheading that effort. So today is the 16th day of Ramadan, and many of the Muslims globally and here in our state are observing the fasting to get closer connection to their God. Yeah. And what kind of message are you sending to them?
Well, Ramadan Mubarak to the community, and I think it's always interesting when it's Holy Week as well for people of Christian faith, and as we're thinking about the holiday and fasting and being intentional about really thinking about our community members who don't have enough. I think that has been a real motivator for the kind of budget that we have tried to put together. So making sure that people who are living in poverty have their needs met, that we're caring for our children, that our elders are taken care of as well, and that as a community we're just meeting the needs of our neighbors. That to me, I think, is the real opportunity of this holiday, and I think it's humbling to have been able to participate in some iftars in community, and just know that the intentionality around the faith and taking care of each other, we all should do that more, and it's an inspiration, and should be the foundation really of how we talk about One Minnesota. It's all connected.
So there are different initiatives by different organizations trying to host iftar dinners for different communities. You mentioned you've attended one. How do those events bring communities together, people of different faith, culture? Tell us more.
Sure. So I've been fortunate to attend multiple iftar over the last few years. The most recent one that we had was actually in partnership with the governor's office, the House of Representatives, and the state Senate. So we had, of course, all of the Muslim representatives and senators were there, but really was just an opportunity to, during the breaking of the fast, to share a meal, to visit, to catch up, and to really, I think it's powerful when there are people from all different walks of life who are sharing a meal together. That's how we heal, that's how we make connections, and that's how we do good work together. And to me, that's what I've experienced, and that's what that means.
Thank you so much. So those are some of the main questions I wanted to ask you, but I know we have other viewers who will be watching the program, and there may be something we have not mentioned. So if there's any message that you wanted to share with the community about your trip today, about any plans coming in the future, or any of your main accomplishment as a lieutenant governor in the last 2 terms, you're more than welcome to share.
Thank you. I would just say that the community of St. Cloud and the central Minnesota region deserves investment. And that's what I heard over and over again. We went to the site of the future Children's Museum, which was really exciting, and I can't wait for that to come to life. But I think that that's the biggest piece. We don't believe that children and families come in pieces. We shouldn't budget that way. We shouldn't treat people that way. We need to make these investments. We have a budget surplus, and that budget surplus should be reinvested in the community. So the most important thing that your viewers need to know is to make sure that they are calling their representatives and their senators to get these really important investments across the finish line. We have got about 5 weeks before the end of the legislative session, and we need everybody to be calling and saying that these investments in children and childcare and housing and education and infrastructure all matters.
Thank you so much for your time. We are really appreciative of your effort to come to the studio and talk to our community and share your main accomplishment, your main priority areas, and how you're willing to support the community on main and major barriers, including the financing issue. I would like to thank you today for the interview. Thank you so much, dear viewers, for watching. We are very glad to have our Lieutenant Governor on the first day of XIDIG TV studio. We really appreciate her accepting the offer to come and be our host. We want to thank you for watching. If you have any views, any comment to the program, please feel free to reach us on our platforms, Facebook and our XIDIG box. Thank you so much for watching.